All right. My loser, and Case, I know that you want to talk about these guys, but they're the Calgary Flames for me. It's been a tough year in Calgary, boys. I mean, there's no other way around it. We looked at this team on paper after really, after being forced to pivot after losing your two superstars in Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk, and we all thought, geez, they get Huberdeau and Weegar, and they've done a really great job pivoting from a really tough situation, and they're a good team, and they'll be right back in the playoffs, and maybe could win the Pacific Division. No, nothing's worked. They had a lot of guys who had career years last season, including the guys that they brought in that Florida trade. Huberdeau there this year has been an absolute disaster. He just doesn't have it. The goaltending, I think Daryl Sutter has been extremely hard on these guys when it's been so tough there, and they need a guy behind the bench who can get off them a little bit, just pull back a little bit. It's been really tough, and so I don't think they're going to make the playoffs at this point. They have to go on a huge run at this point late in the season to make it in. They haven't won 4 games in a row all season, so to now try and string a bunch of wins together this late and try and squeak in, it's just not possible, I don't think, for this team. So they're in a really tough spot, but I really thought that Brad Treliving, with the way he is, he's an aggressive general manager. Obviously, we know that. He likes to be in on everything, that he would really, really do his best. And you know what? He probably tried, but I really thought he'd be able to get something done to give this team a shot in the arm, and he failed to do that. He made 2 minor trades, redeemed Zahorna to Toronto for Dryden Hunt, just a minor league deal at best, and then swapped out a couple of players in Connor Mackey and Brett Ritchie for, of course, Brett's brother, Nick Thick Ritchie, and Troy Stecher, which is a move that really won't do much for your club. I think that Ritchie is a Calgary Daryl Sutter kind of player, but at this point, that's not something that's going to do a lot for you. I think that Treliving was maybe better off to give his team a shot in the arm with someone of significance, or accumulate some picks and some prospects and kind of do what Washington, Nashville, St. Louis did leading up to the deadline. Maybe by next year's deadline, this team will be in that spot where they will have some big pieces to sell off, and they can bring in a ton of assets and focus on their young players, because I think they've got lots of good ones. But man, we did not expect Calgary to be in this spot, and I just think they could have added something, or just made some good moves at the deadline. They just kind of stood pat, and they're not any better, and probably not going to make the playoffs. So thoughts on the Flames as losers?
I think everyone is disappointed in this team for not making a move to try to make the push. But if you take a step back and think about this team, I don't think it's the end of the world. It's going to be hard to catch Colorado and Edmonton as the wild card spots. Think about those 2 teams being the wild card spots at the moment. It's going to be tough. And I think that this team has maybe the mentality of the Philadelphia Flyers, but rightfully so, in that this team can be really good next year. They've got all their good players locked up with some term. They've got Lucic coming off the books next year. They've got Thick Rich contract, $2.5 million coming off the books next year. And I think there's some Michael Stone IR cap coming off. They're going to have some wiggle room in the free agency this year. And like Harp said, they've got some good young players. Hopefully the goaltending can bounce back. This team can be good next year, and they could be in a good spot. So maybe they're a little gun shy because they didn't want to screw up next year. And it's also a deep draft. We talked about that. But yes, Harp, this was a team that I wanted to mention in this episode, because the lack of trades was a little bit alarming, and kind of like you said, we expect Treliving to do a lot, and we expected this team to make a push, but it's crazy. It's crazy to think that Nashville is ahead of them in the standings, and look what they did.
That is wild. Case, I'm leaning more towards your side. I don't know if you two are directly opposed, but I think, Case, you are more of the mindset where you look at this team, you take a step back, and you think next year they could be just as good, if not better, than they were last season, given all the pieces. And I'm more so in that camp because if we look at this team, at the start of the year, clearly they had some major changes to the personnel. And also this season, they've gotten terrible goaltending from both of their guys, and they're still generating expected goals. They're just not finishing. So I know it's more complicated than that, but when you boil it down, they're still generating offense and they're not getting saves. So next year, I'm willing to bet on this team as a playoff team if everything stays the same, just because, a lot went wrong in Calgary this year. And I think it would take a lot of things going wrong again next year, sort of in the same way, for them to be in the same spot. And I just don't see that happening. So I don't know if they're the losers of the trade deadline, in my opinion, because, Case, I think you're right. Maybe they were a little gun shy, given the fact that they have a pretty good team on paper. And you know what? For this team, I'm okay with that. Because I think they are still pretty good. And Harp, you mentioned the young players too. I think they're going to factor into the team next year even more so. Jacob Pelletier is really, really good. He is, man, watching that guy play and looking at some of his underlying numbers already in the few games that he has played, he looks really good. He looks like he's going to be an offensive threat every time he's on the ice. So that's important for them because they need guys to score. This year it hasn't gone that way.
By the way, I want to point out a mistake I made about the cap situation next year for Calgary. All of that stuff is coming off the books, but something to remember is Huberdeau's contract kicks in next year, and that's an extra $5 million on his deal. So it's not
Uyghurs
as good,
too, right?
It's not as
Doesn't
good.
Uyghur start next year?
Yeah, it does. And so with those two contracts starting and everyone else coming off the books, they actually already have $1.76 million more next year for forwards.
Well, I mean,
And
at least you're
defense.
paying it to those guys instead of Milan Lucic. You just better hope next year that your $6 million man between the pipes plays like a $6 million man. Really.
Sorry, they are doing better on the cap next year for forwards, but defense, it goes up. I'm all over the place here. Just go Google cap friendly and go look at the team yourself.
Because that's what we're doing on the fly.
Yeah.